Hello, everybody. I'm Kim Dongwook, professor of Graduate School of Public Administration, Seoul National University, and I'm a director of Center of Intelligence, Society, and Policy. Today's we witness a lot of new phenomena produced by artificial intelligence, AI. So our center have been studying the phenomenon and policy issues and policy alternative related to AI. Today, we host special forum to discuss AI and the democracy. Let me introduce wonderful today presenter, Professor Fabrizio Gilardi. Please give him a big applause. Professor Gilardi teaches public policy at the Department of Political Science, University of Zurich. So, day before yesterday, he came from Switzerland. So, do you know the most the number one country Korean people want to visit is Switzerland. So he's coming from wonderful land, Switzerland. Okay, so I will give him microphone to him. 30 minutes or 40 minutes. Okay, so you go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for the nice introduction and for the invitation to be here. It's a great honor to speak today here at Seoul National University. My talk is about technology, about problem definition in the digital democracy, which is the title of a project that I've been working on for a few years. Which we study lots of different aspects linked to digital technology and politics. And the premise of the project and also of today's talk is the fact that often in the area of technology, there is a consensus. Many people agree that we have a problem, for example, with social media and now with AI. But there is disagreement regarding what the problem actually is specifically. And here, School of Public Administration, we know that in order to produce solutions, we first have to have some consensus regarding the problem that we want to solve. And I think that this is often lacking in this area. Many examples, of course, in the past, at least since 2016, when Donald Trump was elected as President of the United States, and a lot of the discourse was suggesting that social media played a very important role. So social media since then has been framed often as a problem for democracy. We can see many examples. We can think of TikTok now that is in the process of being banned in the United States. And of course now artificial intelligence. And so there is this headline in the middle of the slides that sums up, in a sense, one of the arguments of the project. So it says, so Congress agrees, big tech creepy, can't agree how. And I think that's a nice summary of this idea. So why is that? Because we know from public policy that policy analysis that problem definition is in the policy cycle one of the major steps. So in any area of policy making, there will be a step in which the problems are defined. However, I think that the area of digital technology has some specificities that make this step even more salient. One reason is that there is often a lack of transparency it is hard to understand from the outside as independent researchers, but also as society, what are the causal effects of technology. So, for example, there are many claims that social media has effects like elections or votes, like Brexit. There is a very active debate on the link between social media and mental health in teenagers, for example. But it's really hard to determine what is the causal role of technology in for those problems. There are many reasons to think that they might play a role, but it's hard to really come to a clear conclusion regarding the role of technology. At the same time, it's very easy to come up with a lot of examples. I think we can all find many examples. So the idea that technology is causing problems is very plausible. We can find many examples. And so there are narratives that have emerged that makes sense, but we don't know to what extent they are actually based on facts. So those narratives emerge, become entrenched, and in the end, they tend to persist even when maybe evidence is produced to refute them. So the last wave of studies, for example, in the meta-election study, in which researchers were able to cooperate with Meta, access data, conduct experiments on Facebook, on Instagram. So those studies, they refuted a lot of the more dramatic claims about the effects of algorithms on opinions and vote intentions and so on and so forth. However, in a sense, it is too little, too late. The narrative remains. And with AI, it seems that we may be repeating the same cycle. So the focus today is more specifically on artificial intelligence. We are in the process of conducting several studies, which is why most of what I will talk about today is work in progress, which is also the reason why I couldn't really share papers, because even though the studies are almost completed, we have not written them up yet. So this is really work in progress, which means that any feedback is even more valuable than usual. So the first set of studies focuses on AI narratives and their impact. Again, if we focus on the discourse around artificial intelligence, lots of claims that AI can be a danger for elections, for democracy. There is a link that is made very often between AI and disinformation. This is a worry that many people share. At the same time, there are also other narratives that are even more dramatic. I'm sure that you have heard about these statements by very prominent CEOs, such as Elon Musk, Sam Altman from OpenAI, and so on, saying that the AI that is being developed and is already here, is so powerful that it might present a risk of extinction for humanity. So there is often this parallel between AI and the nuclear weapons or nuclear energy. So this is a very dramatic narrative that points out that we may all die because of AI at some point in the future. Other people are pushing back against this narrative and are saying that those claims are just a distraction from the actual risks that may be less spectacular, but equally important and already present now. That can be the biases that are embedded and reproduced in artificial intelligence, but also disinformation is one of the concerns that is often linked to these immediate risks of AI. And going back to the idea of problem definition, this is relevant when it comes to policy making and developing policies or regulations for AI. So I know that on Tuesday this week here in Seoul was the AI summit co-organized by the UK government and the Korean government. And I haven't been able to read on what they discussed. But of course, those discussions, to some extent, are informed by these claims that are made about what are the dangers of AI. So there are different ways to understand the problems, and therefore different ways also to develop policies. These worries can be quantified to some extent. We have done a relatively simple content analysis of news media, English-speaking news outlets, talking about AI in the past 10 years. And on the one hand, of course, we see that the interest in AI has exploded in 2023. Of course, since ChatGPT, a lot of the discourse in the media is about generative AI, again, ChatGPT, of course, but we also see that the sentiment has changed a little bit. So the sentiment has become less positive and more negative, which aligns with this idea that media often talk about the risks of AI, be them existential or more immediate. So again, we are confronted with these two main AI narratives. The first one, existential risk. The second one, the immediate and societal risks narrative. So what we wanted to study and find out in our first study is what is the impact of those kinds of narratives on people. And so we conducted a survey experiment with initially US respondents, but we are in the process. I think this week we will field a second follow-up survey, including also UK respondents. Of course, it's always a bit unfortunate that these studies always look at US or UK, but there are some limitations, or it's so much easier to work with those samples. Of course, we would want also to gather data from Switzerland, but it's, I mean, we can talk about that later if you want, but I think it would be important to do these studies also for Korea and Switzerland and so on, but it's significantly more expensive and complicated, so this is a US study. And what we do is we recruit the participants, and then we divide them into 4 groups. One is the treatment group, is the control group. They don't see these narratives, and the 3 treatment groups are exposed to headlines talking about either the existential threats or the societal risks, or also the benefits, because of course AI can have many potential benefits, and there are also news stories that talk about how there was a new medicine, for example, a compound with potential for treatments, and so we also have that group in our study. The main outcomes is how the respondents assess different kinds of risks. So the immediate risks, the existential risks, but also misperceptions. Misperceptions are statements like AI is an alien technology brought to Earth by aliens. Right? This is also one outcome that we look at. First of all, the descriptive result from the study is that most people rate the immediate risks as more likely. So it's not the case that the existential risks are those that people find as more worrying. So that was already interesting to see, given that those claims about existential risks have a high profile and high visibility. But that's not what most people worry about. And these are the results from the experiment. We see that, so the way to read this plot is that each facet, so each of the 3 subplots looks at different outcomes. So the first one, existential risk, at the top means that the outcome is the assessment of that respondents made of existential risks. Then we have immediate risk and the misperceptions, and each row shows a different treatment group. So immediate, those are people who read stories about the immediate risks of AI, existential, about the existential risk, and the benefits, about the benefits. So what we see are the effects, and what's really interesting is that the existential risk narrative increases the perceptions of all kinds of risk, not only of the existential risk, but also of the immediate risks and also the misperceptions. And looking at the immediate risks, that's also an interesting finding, because one of the reasons why some groups and people push back the existential risk narrative is to say it's a distraction. The CEOs want to push that narrative to distract us from the actual risks. And we're not really seeing that because, again, the existential risk narrative increases all kinds of risk. However, we have also not only asked the respondents to rate the risks on a Likert scale, 1 to 5, but also to rank them. And for the ranking, which are the blue dots and lines, the differences are not significant entirely, but we see that when it comes to ranking, we see some effect in which the existential risks are ranked higher, and which means that other risks are ranked lower, right? Because you can't, if you move a risk up, you have to move another risk down. So we see some of that, but the evidence is not, it is primarily showing that the existential risk narrative is very powerful. And if we compare for the immediate risks, so the middle part of the plot, we see that the effect on the perception of the immediate risks is stronger for the existential risk than for the immediate risk. So if you talk about bias and disinformation, that increases the perception of risk less than if you talk about the existential risk. So it seems that this is quite powerful. Right. So I think I will skip these in the interest of time. Something that we wondered was, do these two kinds of risks, are they really distinct categories? Because maybe this is something that academics construct as different classes. On the one hand, existential, on the other hand, societal, but maybe for people, it's just a single scale, and existential risks are just a stronger form than societal risks, but maybe it's just a single dimension. So we did this factor analysis, and we found that no, in fact, there are two dimensions. One dimension is existential risk plus the misperceptions. So this was interesting. So the misperceptions, they load on the same dimension as the existential risk, but the societal risks are a different dimension. So it seems that it makes sense that these two things are separate categories. We are, as I said, in the process of conducting a follow-up study, and because there are some questions that we could not answer in the first study. And the main difference is that for this new study, the new outcome variables are the perceptions regarding the capabilities and power of AI. So our hypothesis is that maybe talking about existential risk increases the perception that people have about how powerful is AI, which is why they associate more risks. Because of course, if you think that, oh, this is really powerful, then probably there's also more risks involved. Fear of AI, fear of those powers is a second outcome. And then the third one, which is probably also interesting for all of us, is support for different kinds of AI regulation. So I'm really curious to see what we find, and we hope that this could fit in a broader argument, saying that narratives have an impact on the perception of the power of AI, which in turn might affect the perception of risks and also support for regulation. So we hope to write up the paper soon, and then I'll be happy to share it with you. So talking about regulation and interventions, one specific intervention that is discussed, not only discussed, but also already implemented by some platforms such as TikTok and YouTube is the idea that we should label content that is generated by AI on social media. This is a specific intervention, but it is linked to a much broader question. So Casey Newton, who is a prominent tech journalist, said recently that one of the most critical debates about democracy in the age of international artificial intelligence is how will we know that what we are seeing online is real? What should tech companies do when they spot fake? And again, one of the claims is that, and the European Union, for example, last year suggested that Google, Facebook, and so on, they start labeling AI-generated content. YouTube has started to do that. There is a new bipartisan bill in the United States that would require labeling of AI-generated videos and audio. And TikTok, that this was announced 2 weeks ago, is now automatically labeling AI content, not only the content that is created on TikTok, but also third-party content that is shared on TikTok. So this is something that is being done. And we wanted to find out what are the effects of those generative AI labels, because we thought maybe the question is not as straightforward as it seems. There might be some unintended consequences. And to anticipate one of the main conclusions also for me is that so what's implicit in these claims, very implicit here, is that why is the EU suggesting that we have those labels? Because they're worried about disinformation. So in this discussion, there is often not a confusion, but AI generated is often equal to bad stuff or fake. But in fact, you can have harmful content that is human generated, harmful content that is AI generated. You can have harmless or even beneficial content that is human generated, and harmless or even beneficial content that is AI generated. So to us, those are two different things, right? And we wanted to see what happens when we implement those labels. So we did 2 experiments with a total of 5,000 participants in the US and in the UK. And where the main outcomes was the perceived accuracy of headlines and also the sharing intentions. Main conclusion is that headlines that are labeled as AI generated are distrusted, even when they are actually true or human made. And that is because when people see those AI labels, they assume full AI automation, even though that's not necessarily the case, right? You can use AI different ways to write a first draft. There can be a lot of human involvement, but this is not what people understand when they see those labels. They tend to assume that this was completely done by AI without human intervention. So this is the first study. It's a table that looks more complicated than it is, because in fact what we wanted to include in our design is the possibility that there are some misclassifications, which is, I think, unavoidable if this is done at scale. Given the amount of content, there will be necessarily some AI content that is not labeled, which is the missing labels condition. So there are some labels that are missing. Or it can also be that some labels are wrong, that some human content is labeled as AI, and that there's some AI content that is labeled as human. This is very possible because the detection methods are not very accurate, and given the amount of data, there will always be some errors. And so we have both true headlines and false headlines. And so this is how we implemented it, just with a label, so that the panel A is this article generated by artificial intelligence, which is very similar to the way that fact checks are often implemented, with a label saying article fact checked as false. So just a simple label. And these are the effects from the first study. lots of different comparisons and outcomes, but the main point is that everything is negative, which means that regardless of the specific comparison that we make, the effects of AI labels is negative on perceptions of accuracy and also on sharing intentions. And it's also interesting to see as a benchmark, the last line is the effect of those false labels. So the effect of AI labels is about 1/3 of the effect of false labels, which also shows that if we care, if the problem is that the content is false, then it's better to label it as false because it will have a stronger effect. And if the content is not false, then the question is, why do we need labels? Many people want labels. Also in the survey, there's a lot of support for labels. But why exactly? This is a question that intrigues me, because if the content is not harmful, do we really have a need for labels? And I'm interested in your views on that. We wanted to dig deeper and find out more about the mechanisms behind these effects. And so we did a second study that is similar to the first. The difference is that we introduced definitions. Because in the first study, there's no definition of what AI means. It's just a label, which is how those labels are implemented in practice. But we wanted to see what happens if we give participants different definitions. So we have one condition with no labels, that's the control. Then we have the condition with labels but no definition, which is what we had in the first study. And then we have 3 new conditions, the labels plus a definition. A weak definition, saying that AI generated means that a journalist selected the topic, wrote the article, and AI was just used to improve the clarity of the text and adapt it to the style of the news outlet. The medium definition says that AI generated means that a journalist selected the topic of the article, AI wrote a first draft of the article based on sources provided by the journalist. And the third one is a strong definition. AI is that AI selected the topic of the article and wrote the whole article. What we see is that we can find the same effects as before, only with a strong definition. If we provide the medium definition or the weak definition, there is no effect of the labels on perceptions of accuracy, which means that implicitly people interpret those AI labels as this was fully automated and fully created by AI, which again is not necessarily the case. And even if it's the case, it doesn't necessarily mean that the content is false. There can be AI content that is not false, that is accurate in AI. So to conclude, when it comes to trust in AI, it's important to find the right balance. We have, so far, there has been a significant focus on misplaced trust, which means being fooled by AI-generated content, and well-placed distrust, so doubting false AI-generated content. So this has been the focus of many discussions so far. But we should also think about enhancing well-placed trust, so believing AI-generated content that is true, and reduce misplaced distrust, so reducing doubting AI-generated content that is true. And what we worry about is that the alarmist narratives that are out there about AI content, where AI is implicitly equal to false, which is, for example, even the word deepfakes is really suggests that it's something really bad. It's fake and it's deep. It's something that is injected into your brain or something like that. Even though deepfakes come from deep learning and fakes, but the word deepfake is has a strongly negative connotation, right? And talking a lot about AI and disinformation and deep fakes and so on. What we worry about is that this could erode the trust in true content, whether it is AI generated or not. And this also links to the first study where we see that those kinds of narratives, they have an impact on, so for example, they also increase misperceptions about AI. So we need to be careful about the narratives that we spread about AI-generated content is our main message. And stepping back, the broader conclusion is that problem definition of this kind, what is the problem about that, is a key stage of policymaking in general, but specifically in the area of digital technology, where it's even harder to understand what the problem is and what are the what is the cause of certain problems. And there's this tendency to attribute a lot of societal problems to technology. Probably technology plays a role, but there's lots of different things that play a role. This matters because policies, so solutions, depend on how problems are understood. If many problems are misattributed to technology, it may be the case that we do not come up with the right policies. And these kinds of narratives are hard to evaluate due to the lack of transparency. Data access, we have seen that for social media. I think we are seeing this again for AI. There is a real danger or possibility that those narratives become entrenched and hard to challenge, even when data show that they are not justified. And my final conclusion is that it's important that we understand the origins and dynamics of these kinds of narratives if we want to address digital technologies' actual. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Professor Gilardi, for your wonderful presentation. Now we have time for the discussion and the comment and question and answers. So the first discussant is the Professor Mike Doster. He's our school's professor. Okay. I'll give you the
10 minutes. Okay. Thank you very much. Good morning. I would first of all like to start with a short observation. I'm sure that many people in the room know a lot about artificial intelligence, while I know next to nothing other than as a media consumer. I was not interested because I have a general deep instinctive dislike of modern technology and so-called smart buildings and technology that I can't understand, and that excludes me as, if you like, a convicted Luddite who also likes to pay cash. Yeah. So that as a starting point. Nevertheless, of course, the modern technology forces you in. Yeah, you, so to speak, gives a small finger and afterwards the entire hand and then the entire body, so to speak, is put into the machine. So I couldn't help to wonder whether perhaps artificial intelligence could help my academic paper production at some stage. And so I, if you like, asked young people that I know, doctoral students, and I learned by doing, so to speak, Friday before last, that yes, the clarity of the prose of my text could be improved. Yeah, so in this sense, my current view on it is that I will still by hand, so to speak, check everything, but I think that perhaps the comma is now in the right place and, so to speak, the sentence is more clear. And I'm not always agreeing, of course. In half of the cases, I disagreed. Some difficult sentences couldn't be reformed because the content was obscure and I could not put it any better. And even my new friend, Chat, couldn't help me. Yeah. So first of all, the problem with this kind of making work easier is, of course, that the output increases. Yeah, we have more... we can, so to speak, produce a paper with less effort, and therefore the system will soon ask us to produce more papers. Yeah? As a result, we increase the number of papers that are, of course, unread. Yeah, because we live under the conditions of permanent overproduction of discourse. Yeah, so that is, if you like, my small observation. And now I want to make a couple of substantial points regarding partially the presentation and my expectations about the presentation. First, it seems not totally clear what we are talking about. We had here problem definition in the digital economy, the digital democracy, and the digital technology. Yeah, each of that is, in my opinion, a different field. And the only claim to expertise that I could make is that I'm interested in political discourse. Yeah, and of course, problem definition is, if you like, the king's department of political discourse. Yeah, those who define the problems, so to speak, are in charge, and they are going to tell us what to do. That means what we really talk about, from my point of view, is the nature of politics in 2024. And we are talking about the basic fact that political communication keeps changing, and AI is only another chapter in this narrative. Yeah, it started with, let's say, the reduction of the cost of production of pictures and transmitting pictures in a dramatic manner. Yeah, everybody nowadays can run his or her TV studio on a shoestring budget. Yeah, so it is not exactly new that political communication changes, and AI is, if you like, our latest new trend. Yeah, so I personally would say the CEOs who tell us about the collapse of the planet, they just want to stay in the news. Yeah, because they know news is good for, so to speak, their celebrity value and possibly even the value of their companies. Still, what we have here is the cost of narrative of any kind. Mostly in this case, we talk about political narrative, goes down and approaches zero. Yeah, so in other words, everybody now can make narratives that appears to look professional, and our traditional gatekeeper function as academics, that we perhaps can structure the narrative better than someone who presses a button, might be endangered. However, at the same time, I would like to stress a traditional means of political communication, constructing a narrative, organizational discourse, and traditional political entrepreneurship stay all important. Yeah, the political entrepreneurs continue to generate new ideas that are possibly then spread using technology. But I must say my doubt in the rationality of the political discourse was damaged beyond repair during the so-called Corona pandemic, yeah, where we had essentially a central narrative being spread from the top down. We had the closure of the traditional legacy media for critical discourse. And so to speak, my confidence in the system was removed for good. Yeah, so I don't want necessarily the government to regulate some chaotic marketplace of ideas. I would rather possibly stay with the chaotic marketplace of ideas for the time being. Why? Because I think as more is produced, as smaller the audiences. Yeah, we have, from my point of view, the major issue in today's political discourse is to gain and to keep an audience. Yeah, this is the most important skill in politics today, which ultimately has to do with trust. I agree with that. And I also agree that AI as an impact can possibly undermine that. But I do not believe that the technology as such is going to undermine the rules of political discourse as such. Yeah, perhaps I'm naive. As I told you, I'm not a technology expert, and therefore I'm not speaking here with authority on AI. But I speak with some authority on political discourse, yeah, and also with some authority on what means a problem definition. And I can only say that I have become very skeptical with the authority of gatekeepers to define the nature of the problem. Yeah, I prefer a free marketplace in this kind of initial formation of political ideas. Yeah. Now, going further towards what AI might do, of course, this again has to do with politics. What we really have is we have powerful private monopolies, private tech monopolies, who can possibly define the rules of the game. Yeah, that is, I think, the nature of the problem. And we become addicted to the toys that they are, if you like, doling out apparently for free to us, but only in the first round. Yeah, I give you an example. It is, of course, fascinating to have possibly a multilingual classroom where there is instant translation by, I would briefly say, in tendency, AI-style technology. But who is giving that to us? First, the company who is giving that to us can get access to all our data. Yeah, governments, including Ministry of Defense in Germany and other apparently institutions, have zero control over their data. Yeah, it is well known to German policymakers that the American tech companies have total transparency about what goes on in German corridors of power. Yeah, that also, of course, applies to the European Union. It applies to Switzerland. The time where a country could, so to speak, opt out are long gone. Yeah, so I think what we should rather think about is how the tools of the modern technology can be distributed in a more grassroots manner, so that everybody, so to speak, has the same fence in what I think is by nature a political discourse that is heating up, as I said, because the costs have gone down so far to such a low level. But still, as long as the discourse proceeds without audience, its political significance is still going to be low. Yeah, so I again trust ultimately that content creators will be able to communicate with their audiences and maintain trust, because they show us in situations of crisis that they should be trusted. Yeah, and in my opinion, that is not having to do with exactly the hierarchy of our news outlets, but ultimately has to do with our individual judgment about who we want to trust and who we want to distrust. Yeah, so in this sense, ultimately what it is all about is to create strong citizens with a strong ability to judge for themselves what is going on. And it ultimately is what Habermas called the structural change of the public sphere. Yeah, that is AI, so to speak, is another installment of that. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Doster. Okay. So next discussant is Professor Ho Young-jung. He's also our school's professor.
I appreciate having a chance to discuss Professor Gilardi's ongoing projects. A few years ago, I worked on my project examining the relationship between the use of social media and the people's attitude on government redistribution. And in the literature, I ran into a name of Fabrizio Gilardi a lot of times. So I wonder, who is Professor Fabrizio Gilardi? And I now find that he is one of the best experts in the field of political communications, and I'm honored that he is sitting next to me. So, so thank you for visiting our school again. And today's presentation is very interesting. That narratives on the generative AI, as Professor Gilardi properly emphasized, of course there exist positive narratives, but we believe that negative narratives dominate positive ones. So indeed, compare this week's news article regarding the narratives on the generative AI. The left figure is about the SK Chemicals effort, which is the big corporation in South Korea. And the news articles says that the SK Chemicals use the generative AI to improve working environment, which is absolutely positive things. The right figure is about the Scarlett Johansson, the famous actress, shocked and annoyed by the ChatGPT's use of her voice without her consent, which is definitely negative. I wonder, which parts are you familiar with, the left news article or the right news article. I think right news article is more familiar with you. It means that the negative narratives on the generative AIs are dominating our world, which is emphasized by the Professor Gilardi. Actually, the narratives are centered in our daily life. I'm majored in economics, and in the field of economics, also the Robert Shiller, the Nobel economist, also write down about the narrative economics, that the narratives cause the financial crisis, and the narratives are always been close to us, and it has been confirmed regardless of the academic field. Similarly, narratives on the generative AI are situated at the closest point in our daily life, and we encounter the narratives all the time. The important thing is that they influence the formation of our political preference and political knowledge, which has been the most important literature strand in the political communications. However, in the policy front, we are experiencing a kind of cultural lag, which means that systems, policies, institutions, regulations corresponding to the AI development are slow. They are clearly lagging behind. In this vein, today's presentation is both crucial and significant, providing insights on how to understand and handle AI narratives. Today, Professor Gilardi presents seminar ongoing project. There are 2 projects right now, right? And I examine from a historical and policy-making perspective. Remember the Luddite movement in the past, which occurred during the Industrial Revolutions. This movement stemmed from the workers' awareness of the danger that machines may replace human jobs. Professor Gilardi's project shows well how the existential, substantial, and immediate risk of AI would impact the narrative formation. Additionally, I would like to add that the nature of the narratives may vary depending on the platform. Which platform means the kinds of the Google, Naver, Daum, kinds of the website, Facebook, Twitters. For example, a growing literature studying the effects of the social media demonstrate that the existence of political and user bias exists between the Facebook and Twitters. For example, the left-leaning people use the Facebook and right-leaning people use Twitter, something like that. So I think the platform on which AI is generated may greatly influence the narrative formations as well, which is also witnessed by the Professor Gilardi's past work in 2022. Then, what role should the government play? In other words, how should the narratives on generative AI be reflected in the policy decision-making process? I wonder which part is correct, and I do not have an answer, but policy intervention to the narrative's origin or policy intervention to the narrative's result? I don't know. But this is a really big issue related to the government role and ultimately into the democracy. Finally, this is my personal interest that it would be very great to have a follow-up research on whether AI narratives reinforce or mitigate our discrimination concepts. For example, I bring the example of the Korean sports. Do you know the baseball? Baseball, of course.
I know the sport.
Yeah, and baseball is very famous in Korea. And from this year, now AI decide the call, strike or ball of the pitchers, not human judge. So we expect it mitigate the social discrimination toward the That means it dissipates the effects of the superstars in these sports. However, we also expect the social discrimination will be reinforced because of the characteristic of the AI that the more the better and the winner takes our society. So thank you for this. Thank you for my discussion.
Thank you, Professor Zhang. Next discussant is the Professor Choi Han-byul. He's now access to the online. So, Professor Choi.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Han-byul Choi, an assistant professor at Gunsan National University. And first of all, thank you, Professor Gilardi, for your insights. And Gunsan, where I am, is far from Seoul, so please understand that I will be participating online. And as I'm not a native English speaker, so my delivery may not be clear, so I'll show and talk through the presentation. And I'm going to have a very, very short discussion focusing on impact assessment in AI regulation. So next slide. So Professor Gilardi mentioned that the lack of transparency and data access hinders the evaluation of AI narratives. So I believe addressing this negative narrative is crucial to gaining public trust and ensuring the effective use of AI in public administration. Next slide. So Professor Gilardi emphasized that addressing both existential and immediate societal risks of AI is necessary for a balanced view. So establishing ethical standards and practical guidelines will help mitigate these risks and build a positive narrative around AI. So to build trust, we must reduce AI's negative aspects. So we need to understand how AI makes these decisions. Transparency and accountability are key. So we also need clear and credible ethical standards for AI. Public organizations should use practical guidelines, and these standards prevent misuse and ensure responsible AI use. Next slide. Professor Gilardi pointed out that lack of transparency and data access is a major barrier to evaluating AI impacts accurately. So in the US and Europe are preparing to regulate AI through impact assessments. These assessments manage AI risk. I think impact assessments are a practical approach to managing AI risk. And gaining stakeholders will further enhance trust in AI systems. It is hard to regulate every aspect of AI, so assessments are planned to ensure public trust. We need transparency and accountability. The need for regulation is inevitable, and the challenge is how to regulate it. I think there is a lot to discuss in this area. I also have a related question. What specific measures can ensure transparency and accountability in AI systems? And how can stakeholders be effectively involved? Next slide. AI is indispensable in public administration despite negative narratives, and building a positive narrative around AI is necessary for future advancements. So thank you for Professor Gilardi for your insight.
Thank you, Professor Choi. Next discussant is Professor Kim Junyoung. He's professor of Suncheon National University. Okay, Professor Kim.
Yes, yeah, I'll start my discussion. Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Junhyung Kim, and I'm an assistant professor at Suncheon National University at Department of Public Administration. Please excuse me that I cannot participate in this honorable event because of another schedule. So let me start my discussion. Because my research field is digital government or electronic government, today's presentation was very insightful and informative one to me. And for future research development, I would like to make a few comments on this research and future research. First, I think this research focuses on what are the AI narratives and how AI narratives influence on people's perception on AI or AI-generated content. Of course, this research is very informative and insightful one, but I think we also need to focus on the research questions like what shapes AI narratives, or what are the factors that influence on AI narratives. For example, the factors that influence on AI narratives can be investigated by each individual's preconception or prejudice on technology, and or the mass media coverage's framing effects, or the government's policy directions or intentions. So if the research is focused, if this research is focused, and the research focus that I suggest can be combined in a single research, or can be dealt with simultaneously with peer researchers, then it will be more meaningful in a scholarly and practical sense. And second, we need to think about the AI narrative from the public administration or policy perspective. If the research purpose is to investigate the impact of the AI narrative on digital democracy or public decision making, not just to investigate it from general or technological perspective. More specifically, I thought that this research was interested in how the AI related problem, and then I thought this research attempted to illustrate how AI narratives or people's conception on AI narratives can be influenced by public administration or policy characteristics, such as public deliberation characteristic, organizational capability, and institutional flexibility. But it seems that this research put less focus on digital democracy and public decision-making part, and more emphasis on AI narrative and people's perception on AI narrative part. Therefore, I recommend that future research focus more on the relationship between AI narrative or people's perception on AI narrative and digital democracy or public decision making. And third, we need to think about how to understand digital technology related problems in a comprehensive and systematic manner. Well, more specifically, this research, this paper focuses on the AI-related problem, and it is surely one of the most important digital technology-related problems. But there are numerous other digital technology-related problems, such as dysfunction of social system resulting from malfunction of digital infrastructure, and human alienation resulting from digital divide, and loss of humanity resulting from digital addiction, and cybercrime resulting from public information leakage, and decision-making distortion resulting from algorithm bias. So we can approach these digital technology-related problems from individual, group, organizational, state dimension, or producer-user dimension, or problem-solution dimension, to make this kind of issues more comprehensive and systematic way. So I think we need to understand the digital technology related problems in a comprehensive and systematic manner. And fourth, I recommend that this research categorize or specify the types of the impact of AI narratives. This paper categorizes AI narratives simply into existential risk narrative and immediate social risks narrative. And I think this is a meaningful attempt, but I think we need to develop more comprehensive and systematic typology of the impact of AI narratives. For example, we can categorize the impact of AI narratives according to various criteria, such as input, output, impact, effect dimension, or individual, group, organization, state dimension, or producer, user dimension, or problem solution dimension. So if we can develop the systematic and sophisticated understanding on the impact of AI narratives, then future research on this kind of research objective will be more fluent and will be more meaningful in scholarly and in a more scholarly and practical sense. And finally, I think we need to consider the data, technological, organizational, institutional requirements for enhancing well-placed trust and reducing misplaced distrust in AI in future research. I believe that this paper is a meaningful starting point of the analysis on AI and its impact on society. But I think the ultimate goal of the research needs to find what are the constraints and driving forces on enhancing well-placed trust and reducing misplaced distrust in AI from public administration and policy perspective. For example, the technological and policy attempts to verify the accuracy of data and output is being discussed and being developed. So such attempts, such scholarly and practical attempts will be helpful to give more scholarly and practical key solution to this kind of problem. So in future, uh, of course, this kind of research to find the current state and people's perception on AI narratives, but more broadly, I think this kind of research, such as finding or practical and scholarly solutions to solving these problems will be helpful to uh, enhance and broaden the scope of research. Yeah. This is the end of my discussion, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Kim. Now the very honorary scholar, our school's colleague, Professor Tobin Im, here. So please, some comments or questions on this presentation and any discussions.
Thank you very much, Professor Gilardi. So, unfortunately, I missed your first part of a presentation. And as Professor Doster said, I'm also very weak at AI and computer and all ICT. So it's just a very naive comment. I recently really fear generative AI. Because now it's a stage of out of control, right? And fortunately, European Union had announced the regulation of 4 categories. I think it's a good stage to start with this wicked problem. We cannot control the AI because, to my understanding, just you put all the big data and AI generate the idea. How we can control? Some of commenters also talked about transparency or accountability. how we can see what is happening in the machine. Transparency doesn't matter. So in the political arena, with regard to democracy, this is really challenging problem. My question is mostly how we can understand the mechanism of provoking public anger against some political leaders or political parties. Okay? Depending on languages and vocabularies you are using, people get more and more angry. Okay? They can manipulate people's opinion, their way of thinking. So is there any study to measure how the anger can be stimulated or how we can even control people's feeling of anger or fear or whatever? That's anger management is more important than another technological methodology. Thank you.
Thank you very much for these very thoughtful comments, and I appreciate them even more since I haven't really shared the paper, so I know how difficult it is to make such good comments. I appreciate them very much. So we'll have to make a selection, of course, otherwise I will speak for another half an hour. So maybe so I will pick up something that is, I think, highly relevant for public administration and the use of AI in public administration is this question of the black box nature of AI, because the state, when it makes decision, needs to be able to justify the decisions. And when using AI tools, that's typically not possible because the AIs, they work as black boxes. These are at least some of the discussions linked to the use of AI in public administration. Can citizens appeal a decision if they do not know the reasons why a decision was made, because the AI system is not explainable, for example? And I think there are a few questions that are quite interesting, and so one of my co-authors is a psychologist, and psychologists working on these questions, they tend to remind us that it's not the case that we can always explain how we humans make decisions, right? There are ways to, of course, try to understand how we function as human beings. But in the end, if someone gives us a particular reason for a particular decision, there is no way to know if that is the actual reason or just a rationalization that is made ex post. So I think many of us teach, we grade an exam, and then maybe 1 week later a student comes and asks, but why? And then, of course, we can come up with very compelling reasons to justify the grade, but was that the actual motivation last week that motivated me to grade? It's not that clear, right? So I think this brings up the question of the benchmark. Maybe sometimes there is an idealization of human decision-making. Also, when it comes to bias, is of course one of the very well-taken critiques of AI, that it may reproduce biases and so on. But humans are biased too. So some people even argue that it may be easier to detect bias in AI systems than in human decision-making, for example. The second point regarding black box, transparency, and so on is that those were definitely 100% correct for pre-generative AI systems, because you would have an input and output and no idea what's going on in the middle. Now, generative AI, ChatGPT, as you certainly know, is very happy to justify the decision it makes. So in that sense, you have a justification. Is it really, what is the relationship between what the ChatGPT tells us and the process by which it produced the decision? We do not know, but the psychologists tell us we do not really know for humans either. But at least with ChatGPT now we have some information through which we can evaluate whether the decision is correct or not. And sometimes the justifications are actually quite. So we can verify that the arguments that ChatGPT gives are correct. In some cases we can do it, in other cases we can't. So what I'm saying is not that we should go ahead and deploy ChatGPT in public administration. The point I'm trying to make is simply that some of the standard arguments against the use of AI in public administration are becoming less clear to me in the face of generative AI, and I don't have any solutions. But I think it's interesting to think about these issues because transparency, the black box nature of AI is something that is changing, and there is also a lot of research in computer science that I do not understand, but I know that it's the so-called explainable AI. It's a whole subfield of research where people try to come up with ways to understand how the systems make decisions. So possibly there will be also some progress on the technical side of AI. If I have time, or shall we open the discussion? More questions, if there are questions. Otherwise, I can pick up some of the.
Hi. Thank you. Well, I'm Chihei Chung from CISP, and it's really an honor to meet you in person, finally. Well, thank you very much for your presentation. I really enjoyed it. And the thing is, the topics that I'm looking into at the moment are the AI ethics and the AI regulatory governance. So when you said that in the end of your presentation, that problem definition is the key stage of policymaking in the area of digital technologies, it kind of like really hit me very very much. So I think that like the questions that we're gonna have to focus on while trying to solve out the policymaking problems in the era of AI would be like, what are the problems, where to go, and what to do, like to simply put, right? But the disruptive manners of AI technologies, as you mentioned, actually make it difficult for us to define what are the problems itself. So I'm just gonna like dump you with the questions that I'm working on at the moment, and then hopefully I'm gonna get some ideas and insights from you. And yeah, maybe we're gonna be able to chat later on. But one of the biggest questions that I'm looking into is the definition of the AI itself, and also the roles and responsibilities of diverse different kinds of entities in the regulatory governance. For instance, you mentioned at the beginning that like there are different kinds of AI in the market, and most of them are actually thinking of generative AI at the moment, but that's not true, right? So I saw the news last night at the AI summit. They talked about this issue, and they said that like we have to look into either the algorithm itself or application. You know, there are different kinds of discussions between them, and we have to decide where to go. But when we talk about AI as a vague manner, it makes sense. But then when you look into the specific example, for instance, like automated vehicles, it gets more complicating, right? So if that's the case, like, are you going to be looking into more like detailed versions of like how to define AI while you're looking into further discussion material, like discussion research in your thing? That would be my first question. And the second question that I have is what I think is at the moment expected roles and responsibilities of the different government entities and regulatory entities are diverging very differently at the moment. So for instance, from the nation state wise, the labeling, for instance, like which government sector, which policymaker, or like under what kind of criteria they can decide like the definition of AI or bias or false information. Like that would be very different from entity to entity. But when we look into the broader way, like in international wise, like there's going to be like different definitions between different governments. For instance, like in the US, they are like actually more willing to open up their market for AI developer companies, right? So they're more active in persuasive way to let those developers have their own way to regulate things, while EU, on the other hand, they're more into regulating AI companies because they don't have certain companies that they own such big data in their market. So the second question would be like, do you consider those kind of like roles and diversifying roles and responsibilities in the your discussion or like in the way of developing your study? And the last question is the experiment study that you had about the perception was actually the one that I'm like planning to have in Korea as well. That's very similar. But what I realized in your studies, you're focusing on the consumer aspect, like in general, or maybe I got it wrong. So like the users expect perceptions, but what we're trying to do at the moment is like looking into politicians or legislators' perspectives, if it's possible. And like, do you think that there's gonna be like some kind of like differences in between those kind of different entities, and that would maybe have different results in their perceptions and finalizing into the different levels of support for the regulatory decisions for the government to make for against the AI technology development? Well, these are all for now. Well, thank you very much.
You raise a lot.
I thought it was the time.
That is not only the question for the Professor Gilardi, but to you, Dr. Chung, your own questions and research topics. Okay, how about?
Thanks so much for your very insightful presentation today. I'm Young Wan-jun, the postdoctoral researcher in the CISP, and I just found that the presentation you made today is highly focused on the US respondents, the 3,000, the survey respondents. And I think this is a very perfect place and time to think about the different dimension or the different mechanisms that may be detected in the different contexts. So as a South Korean scholar in here, I may raise a question about maybe the AI narrative mechanisms and the AI related perceptions is working differently in the Asian country, especially in South Korea, is so-called the fear of being left behind. Is add to the Dr. Zhang's question. It's not only being lagging behind, not only because of the market conditions and the money we can spend. It's also about the language we are using and culture we are having right now in here. Because as per the nature of the AI, they are developed based on the English context and English text, and they are using the large quantity of the data to develop their AI models. So considering this nature, maybe we should question about how we deal with the left behind countries who are using the unique languages and unique cultures, and they are only using this AI model based on the translated data to the English from their original context. So fortunately, they are having some great international effort on that to work with them. So 2 days ago, on Tuesday, there was kind of Seoul AI Summit. So there were 16 AI leading companies. They are talking about how to deal with these kind of competencies and the cultural context in here. But I wanted to hear from you, Dr. Gilardi. Could you please share some insight about these international factors, how it impacts the future, the AI industries and the problem definitions in this field? Thanks so much.
Yes, if I have time, I can answer some of the questions.
Yes,
Maybe we start with the last one. One obvious international dimension is the international competition in the era of AI. So the fear of lagging behind is is I think certainly something that speaks, or one argument against regulation in the United States. It doesn't receive as much attention in Europe, because Europe is more willing to regulate in general, and technology as well. But that's one of the arguments, also almost a national security argument, saying if we do not develop AI, China will do it, and it will be a threat for national security in the United States. So this is a clear international aspect that I can think of without knowing anything specifically on Asia or South Korea. But this is definitely, and also of course the need. I think there is a consensus that for a lot of these problems we need international solutions, kind of a global governance approach to these issues. So of course these are not national problems, these are global problems, and so these international dynamics are certainly very important. And if I may go back to some of the previous questions, which I found really interesting, we'll try very briefly to touch on each of them. So if you can do experiments with politicians, that's great. I mean, that's usually difficult, but if you have access to, if you have the possibility to do it, I mean, that would be, of course, elite experiments, great. I think both is interesting, so the public, voters, and so on. But yes, I mean, I personally would love to do experiments with politicians. The roles and responsibilities of different agencies, I would just say that I think that because AI is such a transversal issue, I can imagine that from the point of view of public administration, there is some so the division of competences is not necessarily clear who is in charge. That is linked again with the problem definition, because if you say, oh, it's just a few big companies, it's a problem of antitrust and competition, then this may end up in the scope of competition agencies. Or if you say this is more like a national security concern, so I can see a link between the way the problems are defined and which agencies try to claim responsibility and resources to address those problems. And then the problem of definition, so not definition of the problem, but definition of AI itself, I think is very important because AI as such is such a diverse set of tools, systems. There's a lot that is not generative AI. Many companies also selling products. Every company would say is AI, and so what is it? It may be a very simple, statistical procedure that is 50 years old, or even just some fancy Excel plus that they sell as AI to the customers or whatever. So it's really worth checking what is meant by AI, but also the broader question that at some point very soon, almost everything will be, if not AI generated, at least AI adjacent. I think even just with modern smartphones, every image is already processed by AI to improve the quality. I've read that the new Samsung models will have an automatic feature in which if you take a group picture, it makes sure that all the eyes are open. That's AI as well, right? And so, but it will be important, I think, to come up with a clear idea of where do we draw the line. We have some kind of things that are hopefully unproblematic, they run in the background, and then real AI. So I think it's totally unclear what counts for the purposes of policymaking. What counts as AI? I don't think we know. I think it's an important question.
Thank you. The time given for our forum is almost run out. So I appreciated your wonderful presentation of Professor Gilardi and also the lots of good comments on the questions. I appreciate it. Okay, that's all for our special forum. So, thank you very much.